Yeah, so it's kind of a big deal. His name is Obaid Omer. He was born in India, so it's probably very cold up there. His family moved to Canada when he was just 6. And he's always had a love of science, which was fanned when he watched the original Cosmos with Carl Sagan. He worked in war zones and disaster areas where he got to see firsthand how sectarian violence can ruin a society. He currently works in northern Canada managing an internet service provider. He advocates for free expression, secularism, and the spread of Enlightenment values. So with a very warm New York City welcome, Obaid Omer. Momentary, just a minute. Thank you for your patience.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. Just want to take a minute to thank Muslimish and all the organizers for bringing this together and letting me talk. I'm going to be talking about dramatic tradition and faith, and if you indulge my really loose interpretation in science as well. And I want to more specifically compare how the frameworks in science and faith deal with the learned wisdom of the hermit. When you hear the word hermit, it normally evokes an image of a person on a mountaintop or in the wilderness who's there to seek wisdom and then bring it back to share with everyone else. When I'm talking about a scientific hermit, I'm picturing someone like Newton who cloistered himself for a few months, came up with his laws of motion, came up with calculus, probably to the detriment of a lot of college students, and then, or Einstein sitting in the patent office, along with his thoughts and coming up with general and special relativity. So when we talk about certain hermits in science, that's kind of what we're looking at. In the Abrahamic faiths, the prophets of old weren't technically hermits, but were tasked by God to go into the wilderness, and then they came back with their knowledge, so I'm kind of treating them as hermits. Patriarchs going back to Abraham all took their charge from God, ventured into isolation, and this might be the reason why tradition of seeking solitude and gaining wisdom is considered a positive in some sects and revered in others. But mainly only in 2 of the 3 Abrahamic faiths, Judaism and Christianity. In Islam takes a slightly more negative view of hermits. The issue seems to be more of an objection to the solitude than to the contemplation of faith, which is seen as a good. In Quran 62:9, it says, "O you who believe, when the call is made for prayer on Friday, then hasten to the remembrance of God and leave off business that is better for you if you know." Quran chapter 57, verse 27, "Then we caused our messengers to follow in their footsteps. We caused Jesus, son of Mary, to follow and gave him the gospel and placed compassion and mercy in the hearts of those who followed him." But monasticism they invented, we ordained it not for them, only seeking Allah's pleasure, and they observed it not with the right observances. So we give those of them who believe their reward, but many of them are evil workers. So basically just saying, we'll give you your due for believing in Islam, but living a life of solitude is not a good life. If you read the story of Abraham, he's told by God, "Go out from your country, your relatives, and your father's households to that to the land that I will show you. Then I will make you unto a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great. I'm so sorry about this. And I will make your name great so that you will exemplify divine blessing. I bless those who bless you, but the ones who treat you lightly I must curse, and all the families on the earth will bless one another by your name. Abraham leaves his household, is joined by Lot. The chapters that follow describe how he's gone into the lands that God has promised him. Abraham settles them, his tribe grows, and his faith supplants the pagan faiths that were there as a dominant one. It doesn't get rid of the pagan faiths that are still there, but Abraham's faith supplants everything that was already there. Then if you follow the biblical lineage from Abraham down, Jacob is the grandson of Abraham, father of the Israelites. They come into Egypt. They're following God's commands, and this sets a stage for Moses. And from then on, every single one of these prophets that comes back, if you read the Old Testament, it's just one litany of a battle after another, crushing tribes that don't believe what you believe, or the Israelites themselves are taken into slavery. It doesn't turn out too well. Like I said, when I mentioned earlier that Abraham's faith had supplanted, there were still pagan religions in that area, and there was always a constant battle between the pagan faiths and Judaism. I'm going to skip the litany of the entire list of Old Testament prophets just to save time, because I could be here all day if I went through all of them. But if you just do a cursory reading of the Old Testament, you'll just see how devastating it was to bring back new ideas to either overturn the faith or to bring a new interpretation of it. Even if you're following God's commands, and sometimes, especially due to the fact that you're following God's commands. And if you look at Moses, he followed the story. He was adopted by the Pharaoh. Then he's out in the wilderness. He goes to the tabernacle, sees the burning bush, gets the message from God. Goes back to the Pharaoh, demands that the Israelites be released. And, he was met with derision, doubt, and ridicule. And then when the demands weren't met, you had the 7 plagues, so basically, toads and locusts, the firstborn killed, oh my. And then after that, like I said, one prophet after another. Take David, it was one battle after another. He sets up modern day Israel. Or there's, like I said, there's devastation that falls upon the believers. They're captured. There's one battle after another. So it's just a constant struggle between the existing faith and the new ones that are coming in, and the new revelations that change the existing faith. It's always a fight. It's never an easy change. And like this constant struggle to supplant the old faiths with new ones, or the faith in the new form based on revealed knowledge of the prophets, is emblematic of how the Abrahamic faiths deal with new knowledge, and to a larger extent how faith in general deals with new knowledge. While being a prophet and a hermit is said to give you the grace of God, all these prophets had hard lives. And it was only through the struggle that any benefit came to them in this life. There's also a cost of not accepting God's calling, and that's the story of Jonah. Jonah refused God's calling and does not want to be a prophet. And then he's swallowed by either a giant fish or a whale, however you want to interpret that. And it's only after he contemplates his decisions and what his life was, and then regrets not accepting God's charge, that he's freed and gained salvation. There are some who argue that Jonah was not technically released from the fish, but it was once he got the true sense and accepted his charge, his release was in the form of death, and the reward was the afterlife. So you can take that as well. And skipping ahead, we come to Jesus. In the New Testament, you'll see how Jesus' life up until about the age of 12. And then he disappears into the wilderness, and we don't hear anything about him until he's 30. And then when he comes back, he's bringing a new message of peace and love, but at the same time, goes into the temple, starts whipping the moneylenders, turns over all their tables. He demands that the temple be broken and said that would be rebuilt in 3 days. So he's challenging the authorities of the priestly class and the political powers. And if you know the story, it didn't lead to good consequences for him. So it's again, it's just showing again that anything that's learned, anything that's new, that's coming back to attack the new images, the attack the old faith, it's going to, it's not going to lead to anything good. Okay, then if you fast forward again to Joseph Smith, self-solved prophet, who by all accounts, except for maybe the Mormons, was a con artist. He was not technically a hermit. He didn't go out for contemplation, but he came up with a new version of Christianity, which is basically another religion. The Mormons were chased from New York State to just outside of Chicago via Ohio and Missouri. Then finally they were chased from there again and settled in Utah. And again, an example of how the Orthodoxy religion does not like any challenges to it. I haven't mentioned Islam much at this point, except in passing. The tradition of the prophets, as I mentioned earlier, was to go out and get contemplation, but the tradition of the hermits, the solitude was not looked well upon. So Muhammad was, if you believe in Islam, he was the last prophet, and he brought back the last revelation. He received the Quran in Mount Hira, and then he came back, and again he was trying to overturn the existing faiths that were in Mecca. He was forced to flee Mecca, then took his followers to Yathrib or Medina, and he gained a much larger following and was able through conquest to spread his message. After Muhammad's death, the spread of Islam was done mainly by the sword. And you can't deny the clash of faiths between Islam and the rest of the world at that point. It was, you could say it was empire building, or you could say it was just to get land, but it was mainly to spread the faith. Another recent example of neo-religious knowledge is the Ahmadiyya community. At first, the Ahmadiyyas were accepted due to the fact that the founder, Miraz Ghulam Ahmad, argued on the supremacy of Islam and had written a 50-volume set attacking Christianity and Hinduism. Later, he then said there were 2 types of prophets. There was the prophets that bring the law, of which Muhammad was the last one, and there were prophets who were sent to reform the faith, and he said that he was one of those. And it was at this point that the Ahmadiyyas started losing support. And there was no real violence against them right away, and that was mainly because the Brits didn't want more strife in their colony, so they suppressed any violence. And you can't say that was a good thing, I guess. But and then after the partition of India and Pakistan, I don't know if you can really say the violence against the Ahmadis was specifically because of the beliefs or because of all the other violence that was going on at that time. It's recently that the Ahmadis have been more and more targeted. A couple of years ago in Scotland, there was a shopkeeper who was wishing his customers Happy Easter, and he was killed for it. In May, in Pakistan, there was a 100-year-old mosque, which is like one of the oldest shrines for the Ahmadiyas, which was burned down. You have to forsake the religion. The Ahmadiyas aren't considered Muslims. They're not allowed to practice as other Muslims. If they do, again, they're attacked. Also, again, in Pakistan, late last year, due to a clerical error, there was a line removed from the oath of office for politicians which said that you have to confirm that Muhammad's last prophet. And when that came out, the population yelled and rioted, and then that would, the military had to come in and break it up. I'm just gonna skip ahead a little bit. Okay. Getting on to science. Science, on the other hand, treats knowledge far differently. Within the scientific framework is the scientific method, as laid out by Descartes in his discourse for rightly directing one's reason and searching for the truth of science. You have 4 basic rules: gather everything, break every problem into smaller parts, solve the simple problems first, and lastly, be thorough. And these may seem self-evident, but a lot of times people just come up with a conclusion and look for facts that fit their biases. Richard Feynman also had 3 rules. His were simple. It was make a guess or a hypothesis, test it in a lab or observe it in nature, and if your guess matches the results with experimentation or observation, you're correct. If it doesn't, then you're wrong. And so the whole thing with science is when you're testing your hypothesis, or you're testing anything like that, you're not testing it to prove it correct. You're testing it to prove it wrong. So a good researcher will try as many ways as possible that he can think of to falsify his claims. And if each and every time his claims seem to be true, then you know that it's a valid, that the theory is valid, and it stands up, and then you can go on from there. Even before the rules were laid out, you had someone like Ptolemy who came up with his motions of the planets, and Ptolemy was completely wrong. The epicycles and all that. He made, it was also an Earth-centric view, and so he was completely wrong. But it was just the way he thought. If you look at the way Ptolemy thought, it was in a scientific approach. Okay, so now, as science has evolved, probably in the late 80s, early 90s of the 20th century, now 21st, you can't have this contemplative work in science anymore. It's become more collaborative. As problems keep getting harder and harder, science requires more people to work on it, except for maybe some people in string theory who are just basically working on math, and they can sit alone and think out math ideas. But for the most part, you need to have collaboration in science, so that it doesn't really follow through right now. And again, like the examples of Newton, who cloistered himself, came out with his rules of motion, and then changed our way we thought of everything. His laws are still predicted. We still use his laws of motion. 100 years after Newton, Laplace then worked out, advanced Newton's theories a little bit more and worked out perturbation theory. So instead of just having a two-body problem, you could figure out why the solar system is not just flying apart because of Newton's rules it would. But we still use Newton's laws today. And even though Einstein came up with special and general relativity to describe time and gravity, and if you used GPS this morning, it was because of that. Then you have Edwin Hubble using his telescope on Mount Wilson Observatory, and noticed the universe was expanding. And then decades later, when the calculations were done, they saw that it was expanding faster, and this led to more questions. Then you had, I guess 2005 or 2006 in CERN, they found the Higgs particle, which proved Higgs theory of how we get mass. And again, it's changing our understanding. That's the one thing in science that's different from faith. It longs for the unknown. Science loves the unknown, whereas faith doesn't seem to. Faith seems to fight the unknown. With faith, the unknown is, if something's not known, either you just say God did it, or you give up. Whereas with science, you keep going forward and looking for it. I'm just going to close with the words of Anne Druyan, who had worked on the Voyager project, and she also helped produce the original Cosmos series, and she's the brain and the heart behind the new Cosmos series, and she was also Carl Sagan's widow. And it was an answer she'd given to a person of faith who talked about the unknown, and this is what she said. I'd like to say that I think that it's just the opposite of what you're saying, from my perspective, humbly. One is that science tolerates the unknown in a way that religion doesn't. My argument isn't with people who search for God. My argument is for people who feel our understanding of God is complete. And those are the people who make so much of our existence on this planet such a hell. Because they really think they have the right to kill other people, to hurt them because of what they understand God's will to be. And that's a very destructive thing. Science, the whole methodology of science is saying that we are not granted these absolute truths. And religion pretends to have. But we do not know the answer to these questions. And not only that, but the little we think we do know, if you can prove us wrong, we'll give you our highest reward. And that's the part of the methodology, the part of the system itself. So yes, to answer what Joan was saying earlier, scientists do terrible things, and scientists have biases. Religious people do terrible things, and they have biases. But absolutely intrinsic to the whole methodology of science is the error-correcting mechanism, which says we must never lose sight of that. This is not in religion, and it's not present at all in faith. Talk about humble. It's the fact that we can do science, and we can bring ourselves to see the tiny little earth in Carolyn's presentation. That is humility. What science has done for us spiritually is that it has been the only thing that I know that has compelled us to wean ourselves from our infantile need for certainty and centrality. And that is very much the essence of so many religious formulations of where we come from and why we came to be. It's a sign of mental health that we can bear to think that this planet was perfectly fine for 4.5 billion years without us, that cosmic evolution has gone through has gone on for 13.5 billion years before we even get here. How long would we be at science? How long would we be systematically looking at nature? Maybe 400 years. But science gets us out to Enceladus, takes us out of the solar system. It enables us to wean ourselves of that spiritual narcissism that compelled us to be the center of everything. So when it comes to humility and it comes to the tolerance for the ambiguity and for the unknown, I think science worships the unknown. I think scientists are most comfortable in that place of not knowing. And that's where they live, and that's the great strength of science. So I would respectfully disagree. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Obaid. I never thought, to be honest, I'd hear someone call a prophet a hermit, and so I was really surprised, but it was really, really interesting to hear about that and see a new perspective on prophets. So